So good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We are going to be recording this event, so please keep your cameras off if you don't want to be seen. And we will have time for questions at the end. So if you'd like to type those into the chat, that would be great. Tonight's event is the second in a series of 7 online lectures and panels, kindly supported by the Paul Mellon Centre for Studies in British Art, designed to complement our upcoming exhibition at Ben-Uri, Becoming Gustav Metzger, Uncovering the Early Years, 1945 to 59, opening on the 16th of June. Unlike the exhibition, which exclusively examines Metzger's little-known formative years, the online events also focus on the mid and later part of Metzger's career. The programme, which runs through until September, is the first of its kind to be held in the UK since the artist's death in 2017, and features contributions by leading art historians, artists and curators with extensive experience of collaborating with Metzger on a number of interdisciplinary projects. Tonight, I'm delighted to be able to introduce Dr. Karina Plath, Deputy Director of the Sprengel Museum, Hanover, who will discuss the publicness of Metzger's work, his early proposals for monuments, and the idea of occupying space by artists, which is later resumed in sculpture projects such as Equivalent Shattered Stones, 2007. Plath gained a PhD in History of Art from the Ruhr University Bochum on the 1970s work of Maria Nordmann. She worked as an art critic for Das Kunstbulletin in Zurich and Neue Bildende Kunst in Berlin, before studying curating at the Center for Curatorial Studies at Bard College, New York. Between 2001 and 2009, Plath was director of the Westfälische Kunstverein Münster, where in 2007 she curated an exhibition of the work of Gustav Metzger. Between 2005 and 2007, she was curator with Brigitte Franzen and Caspar Koenig of Sculpturprojekte Münster 07, and since 2010, she has been Deputy Director and Curator for Painting and Sculpture at the Sprengel Museum, where exhibitions have included Those Early Years, British and German Art After 1945 in 2014, and Production Made in Germany Dry in 2017. Over to you, Karina.
Thank you so much, Nicola. Well, thank you for inviting me. I feel very privileged to be here at the Ben-Uri Research Center and speaking about Gustav's work. I will start immediately to share my slides. Okay. And what I will try to do today is really trying to understand what the public works of Gustav Metzger mean. I was really impressed about the speech that Liane and Nicola, you did last week, and I really thought about it, what it means to continue the work of Gustav Metzger, and I tried to find some questions and answers about it. So as most of you know, and you already said, Nicola, I was part of Sculpture Project's curatorial team in 2007 in Münster, which is kind of this international show of public art or art in public spaces. And we worked with Gustav, and he was first very reluctant to join. I mean, he liked the idea, but from his own history and the history he had with Documenta, he was kind of hesitating to really say yes. So he came over, and first we had the fear that he wouldn't fly over, but then he came. And he would always speak of the organization, which felt like, you know, like he was coming back to Germany, and somehow he felt like a stranger, although his German was really good. And of course, with his background, he was kind of hesitating to enter. And then he did a really wonderful project. And I'm going to speak about this project called Equivalent Shattered Stones. And I'm really thankful for to the Westfälischer Kunstverein to send me the archive again and the files. So thank you, Tono. I saw you online also. Anyway, so we did this project, and in the Kunstverein and with Sculpture Project, and it was parallel because I was director of the Kunstverein. and it was in this space was kind of the station for the public work, but also a small show in one half, which was called Models. And I show you some installation shots of this installation. You see the entrance on the bottom right, left, sorry, where he had the the newspaper of every day feature. Gustav often had to say, like, this is currently happening here in the world. So he would always choose from a new German newspaper the page we would distribute every day and change it. And you see leaflets I'm going to talk about later. So we had a small leaflet produced also for him. And in the space, you see the different models, and they were displayed on brick stones. That was a choice Gustav made. He liked it really to have these stones that are also the kind of the material for the outdoor sculpture, to have them also as pedestals for the models. So have kind of a poor display, but very rough, in which we showed the models. One part of the whole installation was also this big table with a lot of reproduction leaflets, the manifestos, which were then on loan from the archive Sohm from Stuttgart, that helped us a lot. And the estate, Gustav himself, of course, had some copies. And so we tried to make kind of a story, also like a small story really about the development of his idea of monuments and public sculptures. So the models we had, I'm shortly going back. Perhaps you see them on the right. We had like this little monument for like this unrealized, for this monumental sculpture. We had Stockholm June, we had Earth minus Environment, and Victory over the Sun. And I'm going to talk later a little bit about Stockholm June to explain a little more the status of these models. Besides the table, on the whole right side was filled with these strange cardboard boxes. And if you know the work of Gustav a little bit, you know that found cardboard was a very early material he worked with. And in memoriam, this piece here of 2006 came to us from Zachenta Gallery in Warsaw, and before it had been shown in Basel. And it was a kind of a big monument, but here it was kind of put together as a memory. So Gustav just wanted it to occupy space and sit there as a future display for a new monumental sculpture. But it was simple produced cardboard, and I remember the truck coming from Poland with all these cardboard boxes, and that we put out here in the space just to kind of cover it. And it really became kind of this in memoriam, but also a memory of a sculpture and for a sculpture. Besides that, we had like the documentation of this piece Travertin Judenpech on the screen, which was realized in Munich in 2007 at the Haus der Kunst, where Gustav kind of painted the floor between the columns and the buildings of the Haus der Kunst that was built during National Socialism for the Große Deutsche Kunstausstellung, which was kind of the famous art exhibition in which Adolf Hitler somehow displayed the art that he liked. It was a contrast exhibition to the show in the garden, in the Hofgarten in Munich, where there was a show on the general art, and Haus der Kunst was a big display for the official art. And Gustav was invited to do a piece there, and he decided to use tar, which had also the nickname of Judenpech, like Jewish, I don't know the English word. So it's kind of if you're not lucky, the contrary of luck. I have to find the English word, sorry. But he kind of painted the whole thing really with tar, really black, and changed the situation. And we had this documentation in the exhibition also. So this idea of publicness, I thought about it, and I came back to a discussion I once had with a teacher at Bard College at the Curatorius Center, the philosopher Stephen Melville, who talked about publicness. And he made a statement about pieces by Daniel Buren, the French artist, by Robert Smithson and Richard Serra. And he said that the publicness can be something that a work proposes. So he made the example, for example, with Daniel Buren's work for the Guggenheim Museum in New York, where he put a large painting, you know, with the stripes, you know, white and blue. I think it was like a large painting inside the rotunda of the Guggenheim. And Stephen Melville would talk about it as a painting that it offers itself for the public through the form. And I was thinking of it in reference to Gustav Metzger, because somehow Gustav is also not really creating monuments from the beginning, but he really talks about his art from the very first beginning as public art. And then he finds forms to how can they be in the public, how can they address the public. And he does it in the form of manifestos, in symposia, the demonstration, the famous South Bank demonstration. And he finds this material also in public space, like the early cardboards. I'm showing a photo here, which were kind of from packaging that he displayed as a montage on the wall. And he also says, of course, and I'm proud of it, in Hanover, that Kurt Schwitters was a big influence on him. And he also this little model we showed of this model for a big monumental sculpture, where he takes just staples, you know, like from offices. So it's a kind of very cheap material, but it's supposed to be like a big monument of stainless steel, not of stainless steel, but of steel that will rot with time, but it will be very imposing. But from his first manifesto, he really writes, and I'm quoting it here, autodestructive art is primarily a form of public art for industrial societies. So it's this industrial society which asks for new forms, and Gustav liked to work with computers and machines and so on, but it's also, it has to address the public, and the public of an industrial society is different from the bourgeois society museums are made for. So he's very aware of, he has a leftist agenda, but he's also very aware that the form of a public monument has to change in this industrial society. So the first, well, they're not the very first, they're a little bit later because they're in the 70s, but addressing the idea of a monument, he does it in 72. Oh, I have a mistake there. It should be 1972, sorry. So he publishes 2 photographs and proposes 2 buildings to be monuments to Bloody Sunday. And the Bloody Sunday, I don't have probably to tell you that it was like the killing of, as I write, 13 civil rights protesters in Derry by British soldiers on January 30, 1972. And Gustav reacts to it with these 2 photographs, and one is on the left side is the idea of to designate this building of the Ministry of Defense into a monument. So he kind of inverts it. So he takes the aggressor and inverts it and says, this building is kind of the monument for the action of this ministry or the British police. And on the other hand, he takes another building that you see on the right, which is like this huge building covered by ivy, which was near the Institute of Contemporary Art in London, the ICA, and proposes the same. And there is another idea. It's not, the function of the building, but more the look and the monumental outlook of the building, where it becomes like a grave somehow, because you have this ivy and you have this stone. So it's kind of a cemetery and like a cemetery monument that it takes. So with the first one, it's also that when he displayed it, he kind of wrote the date 1998 on it. And I'm not sure, but what I understand, what Tate also writes on the website, is that somehow he kind of is aware of the passing of the time, and that he was really early in declaring these buildings to monuments, and that in 98 he says it's a piece, you know, so he says it's a realized monument in a way. Of course, it's a concept, but you know, when you look back at it, it was also a statement to do it at this early time. As a second example, I'm now going to the Documenta proposals. So there is a big myth in history about it, you know, like, I don't know if it's yet cleared, so Lian, you probably can correct me later if I'm wrong. But as I understand, so he was invited by Harald Seemann, the famous curator of Documenta 5 in 72, and he proposed a small project with a cube with 4 cars, and in the cube, which was kind of plexi structure, the exhaust of 4 cars would go in and make, you know, like show, you know, like the toxic fume of the cars. And this piece was later realized in Lund. And but then he changed his mind shortly before and said, you know, I want to do it with 120 cars, and there should be a big structure, and it's called Stockholm June, and it should be much bigger. And it wasn't realized. There was like a back and forth of letters, like Seemann called and said, why didn't I hear from you for 3 weeks? And then Metzger said, no, it has been different. And then Seemann told shortly before he couldn't realize it because of lack of money. In the end, it wasn't realized. And in the Documenta catalog, you only have like this very small image that you see on the side and a small statement about phase 1 and phase 2. And in the models that were remade in 2006 for Lund, you see 2 structures, and it's actually phase 1 and phase 2. So in phase 1, it was thought that the cars, that the exhaust of the cars will go into the big cube, and then in the second phase, on day 14 for a whole day, the motors should run. And the idea of Gustav was that they would explode, and if they wouldn't explode, he would bombs or some fire would come into the structure, and the whole thing would explode. It has been realized, but only phase 1. So Eva Scharrer was so brave to realize it in 2007 at the Sharjah Biennial at the United Arab Emirates, and the pictures are just from a video that was taken. So somebody was flying with a helicopter over the structure, and I think it was a little smaller number of cars, and of course the cars in 2007 are different from the ones in 1972, so not as dirty anymore, so you don't get so much exhaust. But they were running, and you see the structure, and there was a sandstorm, and so there's a long story if I can tell it better. But they realized it there, and you see how strange it is in this strange landscape of Sharjah, and you have it on a kind of wasteland where they stand, but you also have the feeling there is smog, but it's probably sand in the air. And you have this monumental piece, but you really see how big it is. And if you imagine this in a German Kassel, it's really like a little bit megalomaniac. It's really huge with 120 cars. I wouldn't even think that you find really the place in Kassel to do it, probably a little bit outside. But it's quite impressive. So the monumental was also very important to Gustav. And I always remember when I saw him in London, must be like 2005 or 6, I think. And we met, and we were on a bridge overlooking the Thames, and there was this piece by Anthony Gormley, and we were talking about space in London and how expensive land and buildings are, etc., and rent is. And he talked really about how important it is that artists occupy the space, because if they don't do it, the other people do it. So it was a kind of this fight, but that really culture and artists have should do something about it. So I found it really, I mean, it was kind of logical, but it always stayed with me when I thought about his work, because it's so often about also finding place and occupying space. So now I come to Equivalence Shattered Stones, the project he realized for sculpture projects. And what you see here in the dark is the other side of the same space where the model exhibition was. And that's the space where the computer was kind of the heart of the project was. And this computer was a chance generator. So every morning it would determine a place by chance. And Gustav had determined which spots in the city would be occupied by stones. And so every morning, Robert was the guy who was doing it, that you see on the bottom right, had to go to the Kunstverein, to the computer, and see what site was chosen for today. And it was altogether was 107 days of sculpture projects, so 107 places where stones would be located. And then he would go with a forklift, and it was very important to Gustav to have this forklift. So again, a machine. It was kind of a kinetic sculpture also in the city, and Robert had the task to put them in the city at the spot that was chosen in the morning. So here you see all the spots on the map of Münster, and you see how they were displayed. So there were some totally in order, there were many, there were less, and Gustav somehow. So Robert had a certain freedom, but Gustav wanted them to be, in a way, related to the place. So if you see the column on the ground, so you have the ring, or sometimes they were hidden. And in the beginning, you wouldn't really see them. And after a while, it became a little bit, sometimes it was a little bit disturbing, because also when you would go shopping and then you would see the stones, some were really not important, like you see them below. I think it's the promenade where you have the trees in Münster, and they don't really disturb. I mean, you see them, but 107 places was more and more. And you had a lot of people, of course, because Sculpture Project is this big event. So you have many people walking in the city, and they would see and look for art and see things, and they would discover this kind of stones all the time. And the big challenge was really to, that he decided also they should be taken away in one day. So they would disappear from one day to the other, and get to this 107 points with a forklift and get them back in one day. That was really like the challenge that was really big in the end. Behind the story is another story. And I mean, this is kind of, like, when you see it, it's like a sculpture. It could be like also like an entropy thing by Robert Smithson or something. Like you lay something in the city, you have a stone, you have it loose. It's not sculpted, it's just added. It's like Carl Andre, like one piece after the other related to the site. So it's site specific in a way. So it's so many layers that also relate to like just simple thinking of sculpture of today. But of course, there's also this other history behind. And there was also mostly the starting point. And we had also in the room this poster, and it was a loan from our city museum, like Münster City Museum. And it's a poster of the Royal Army Force that shows the attacks of the British Air Force on Germany. So the British kind of tell how many bombs they fired on the enemy, so to say, and especially you have a certain, like see the Ruhr area, especially, and so, and Gustav was very impressed by a model of the city in the City Museum that in Münster that shows the destroyed city. And Münster was, my parents. I'm actually born in Münster, and my parents told me the story. They were kids, and Münster was destroyed up to 60%. And so there was also, like in many other cities, there were little railways also for transporting, the stones from one place to the other to rebuild the city after the war. So Gustav also liked very much this idea of a kinetic sculpture, like of stones moving in the city, but somehow to reverse it and have the stones lying there, but being moved by this forklift through the city. So he was playing on this old history, but on the other hand, he was also very interested, and we really tried to make it realize that it was somehow also realized in Coventry, because the bombing of the Cathedral of Coventry was somehow the start for really what Germans called also moral bombing, so kind of a revenge and really attacking also civil areas of Germany. And so the last years of the war were very tough in German cities, and Gustav somehow wanted also to have this peace message, to have Coventry and Münster doing this sculpture together. And some year after, I think there was also realized something in Coventry, but we didn't make it to do it at the same time. But it was very important for him. Also, we did like this leaflet on the right side, Reduce Art Flights, die zweite Bombardierung, the second bombardment, which is also typical for the humor of Gustav. I mean, it's really like, like it's you have again, Royal, like the RAF, Reduce Art Flights, the same letters. But the second bombardment is now, the art world that flies into sculpture projects. So it's all the international people who take these art flights. So there is this other agenda, like really about, the environment and, what do we do now, that we fly in to see art, or what is this? So he has like this several layers involved there. And he really, it was really fun for him also to do this leaflet. We did it together with our graphic designer, and then it went on, it went to Torino. And so there are different leaflets again with Reduce Art Flights. And now we have Hans Ulrich Obrist also saying he will never fly or not fly so much again. I mean, he has probably been everywhere before. But of course, this is also something we now think about, especially after COVID-19, if we continue to fly and to continue to make exhibitions like we did before. So this is, like this is kind of a roundabout, like what was presence of Gustav in Münster, which is very rich. You have this idea of monuments, you have this idea of publicness, you have this idea of, like relating to history and a common history also. And of course, his history as being born in Germany and being in Britain, and then now looking from the British side on Germany again, and being invited as a stateless person from Britain to Germany and be like in a big German exhibition. So it was all this ambivalence that he was also living out in this project, and I liked it very much. And the more I think about it, the richer it is, because in the beginning it felt very plain, just having stones and laying them in the city. But the more we talked about it, and the more like histories came up, it was very rich, and it was very subtle at the same time, because it was being just like two stones, and then like this 107 sites in Münster, and like coming to this mass of stones, and we had like to get the stones in, and so it was kind of monumental, but in a very slow way, if you wish. Now I'm today, and I'm looking at trees, and I took this up because I think today or yesterday, I'm sorry, Joseph Beuys would have had his 100th birthday. And for Gustav, Joseph was also kind of this very important figure. There is this famous story of Gustav that he said he would have met Beuys, and Beuys would have asked Beuys, Joseph Beuys, jeder Mensch ein Künstler, like every man an artist, also Heinrich Himmler an artist, and Joseph Beuys wouldn't have answered. So there was always like this, this German romantic artist who was a, who was in the war and kind of continued with his romanticism. And then Gustav as somebody who suffered really from National Socialism, had to flee, lost his family, and somehow has also like perhaps inherited from Romanticism, but really reversed it and really is, like pushing it and confronting us with so many different ideas. So I was seeing this image of these two artists, Aykroyd and Harvey, that now have like this acorns in front of the Tate as a South Terrace. And I was really thinking, oh, that's a total contrast to what Gustav is doing with his flailing tree. And I show the one above in Manchester, and I show below the one we are very proud of to have now in the Sprengel Museum. You see it in the installation of How to Survive, Artist Survival Strategy, a show we just closed. And on the right side, how it's now displayed in our collection. And it was very interesting when we did it, because we had like like Lian and Ulla were telling us it's a willow tree and how it has to be made. And so, and it's not the oak, it's a willow. And also when we killed it, somehow, our press office had the idea that we should pay something, like for, killing a tree, planting a new tree. And I said like, no, it's totally off the point, because Gustav is really wanting us to do what we do all the time. And we really have to confront this. And of course, Beuys has a totally different idea, but I found it so interesting that now everybody is planting trees and Gustav is really showing us how we kill the trees. So I found it really telling, like how, like this German romanticism, planting a tree and making the world better. And then you have Gustav and saying, like, it's destruction, we're always doing it. We have to face it, and we make monuments out of this destruction. So what is the perspective? And I'm coming to an end. So I saw like publicness as mission on the radicality and generosity of Metzger's proposal. Because sometimes I'm thinking about Gustav Metzger's work as an activist artist, but not the best on formal. I mean, when he is a painter very early, I really like, the paintings on steel, etc. And the drawing, the drawings are really great. But when I worked with him, I also thought, well, like, am I making the decision? Like, who's making the decision? And I didn't really understand why he wouldn't be so strict about form, for example. But what I understand is really like, especially from the historic photographs and other works, that it's not so much about the form, but more the message. And the form has to be as radical as it can be. And especially now with the mirror trees, there are different forms, and it always depends where you get the tree from, who's doing the concrete, etc. But what I think is part of the system, also of his system, in a way that you say, like, it's important, it's not important. I mean, the issue is very important, but how it looks in the end, you have certain conditions, but it's not, it's not really important if there is like the tree is a little bit like this or this, but it's important that it is there. So we're occupying space, we are making a statement. And I think that's a very interesting idea of public art, in a way that you also propose things that other people then have to realize, and you realize it in different ways, and you discuss how to realize it, but then it's ongoing in a way. So I was so impressed when Lian was also talking about in the other talk, like, what can we do? So I think it's the idea, and somehow the purpose of Gustav's work is also that we have to carry on. We cannot stop. We cannot say, this is the work of Gustav Metzger and we do a nice archive. And so, but it's more about, like, really the perspective and the continuity of it. So thank you very much. That is, I'm finishing and I'm stopping this now. Oops.
Okay. Thank you so much, Karina. That was wonderful, very interesting. And of course, to see lots of those images as well. At this moment, we're going to open up for questions. So I don't see any yet. So if anyone has questions, we're going to type them into the chat box, which everyone should see probably at the bottom of your screen under the picture. There's a little icon that says chat. Type it in there and I should be able to see your questions as they come in. And if they're directed to Karina, I'll let her know. Otherwise, you can also direct anything to me or Ben Uri Gallery or Nicola. Don't see anything yet, so I'm hoping I do have access to questions.
I saw a raised hand by Robert Parts.
I think it's better if we stick to the chat, probably, isn't it?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, Robert, typing in your question there. I don't actually have the capacity to unmute people, unfortunately. Maybe while people are thinking of questions, Karina, I actually never really asked Gustav how you came about working together. I mean, how did you first meet him? Where was it? Was it before you worked in Münster together, or?
Yeah, it's a Kunstverein. I did a show on strike because in Germany it's some time ago, and I think it was 2005. I did a show on strike. And it was because we had a situation in Germany in the world of working, where there was a lot of unemployment and politicians who said lies about employment and stuff. And there were so many artist groups reacting to it. So I did an exhibition project. And of course, I came across the art strike of Gustav. And, but I wasn't in touch with him at the time. And then we thought about him, and also Brigitte Franzen was thinking about him. I don't know why. I think for her it was more because she had worked on Dachau and more of this perspective on historic photographs, etc. I think we both proposed him. I don't know. And Caspar Koenig, of course, who knew him mostly from his Passive Explosive exhibition with Klaus Steg and Gustav had done in Cologne as reaction to Westkunst in '81. But Caspar had a different perspective, of course, but he found it interesting. So that's when we wrote him a letter. And at the time when I was working with Gustav, he had no fax, no emails. So I would write him letters. We had appointment Thursdays around this time, and he would go to the phone booth and call you and tell you the number. So, and every time, if he didn't call, then we had to call somebody in London, let's say at the museum, for example. I would call Hans Ulrich or something. Did you see Gustav last week? Is he okay? So, so it was not so easy to work, but it worked. So anyway, but for me personally, it was about the strike that I started. And then Justin Hoffmann has written his PhD on Gustav Metzger, so about destruction art. And I read that, and then he was on my mind. And we weren't sure if he would come to Germany, because there was a fame that he wouldn't travel to Germany, he wouldn't go anymore to Germany. And yeah, he came. So
that's great. I remember in later years, he still had a hesitancy about traveling to Germany, and he told me he didn't really want to go again, which he didn't, I don't think, ever again. But he always kind of had that hesitancy within him. It must have been quite difficult, obviously, because it's where you're from, but also the source of so much pain.
Yeah. But then he really got involved with the project, and he really liked to be in Münster and to look at the city and the places and to choose the places. So he came several times, really.
What was the reception like by the people of Münster, with the stones especially?
I think it was really good. I mean, he was not the star, because we had Mike Kelly, Petting Zoo, and things which were more spectacular in a way. But people really liked it. But there were also just disturbed sometimes. That I said, you know, like the stones, and then of course you had shopkeepers and you had the stones in front of the shop, and we didn't really ask, you know, like, so they were just everywhere, the stones, at a certain point. So it was nice. It was not such big disturbance that people would really react negatively, but at the same time, they had like this this presence in a way, which was subdued in a way.
Great, thank you. Well, it looks like I have a question to start off with here as well from the audience. So I'll just read it out for you. It says, Gustav seems to have been ahead of his time in realizing that concrete and building ruins nature and trees. Do we know whether there was anything specific that happened to him to result in this?
I wouldn't know about the concrete.
No. I would say maybe not, it's not a specific thing about concrete, but I would just point back to destruction in general. That was a theme throughout his entire life. Obviously near the beginning of his life, destruction of his home, you know, his country, his family. And he always seemed to have this connection to nature. So I suppose in some way you can look at it as having been, you know, trying to disconnect yourself from the unnatural and, you know, connecting more to the natural. I think he was ahead of his time, but not just about concrete and building, but literally society, humans, ruining nature, and he just saw it all around him, which is probably surprising in a sense that only he was, or you know, very few people, such as Gustav, were talking about it. But I do honestly think that it was difficult for him because it was all a contradiction. Technology ruins nature, has the potential to ruin humanity. But at the same time, I think, Karina, you mentioned he also really actually enjoyed some parts of technology. I mean, he was obviously working with scientists and engineers and created works and liked the merging of art and science too. So I think in the end, he was a kind of man of contradictions, and these dual forces always fascinated him. You know, he saw the good and the bad, you know, in concrete, in building, in human civilization in general. I do have another question. This is from Robert Parks. So he said, we agreed that Johannes Bader was the first performance artist. He started his career as a monumental architect. One of his projects was to build a 1,000-foot hangar with zeppelins to circumnavigate the world, spreading a mission of love and peace. I wonder, might his identification with the monumental would be a tribute to Bader's pioneering work, ridiculed by fellow Dadists?
I'm not sure how aware he was of this. I mean, I know that he was aware of, you know, he was really aware of art history, but more in traditional terms. I understand that he went to draw and paint, and, you know, Kurt Schwitters was already kind of a surprise for me, but of course Kurt Schwitters was exiled in Britain and was active there also. But I can see him learning from Dada, but I wouldn't think that he would really imitate the form or make a tribute. I think he was very, I would think he would think of himself also as a classic, like a revolutionary classic artist, but he was trained really on art history, Gustav. So I would see him more going to museums and making drawings and really studying with Bomberg and so. I'm not sure, but that's my understanding.
Robert says that he talked with Gustav about it at some point. So at some point in the future, I suppose it'd be interesting to hear that story too.
That's great. Yeah, thank you.
Rebecca Brown asks, she says, I'd like to ask if Karina could elaborate some more on the creation or the themes in the 1959 manifesto. It would be interesting to hear some more thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, but I don't know what specific question you have. I mean, there's so much written on the manifestos, and I'm not the best person to out there, but what I understand, I mean, it's also, I mean, he's really early in what he's asking for, but it's a habitus that I know also from artists from the 70s, from, you know, for example, the Art and Technology program in Los Angeles, you know, like this mixture of, you know, scientific technology, you know, like being really advanced, but at the same time seeing the destruction. So also, you know, like Joseph Beuys, for example, was one of the founders of the Green Party in Germany. Without him, probably they wouldn't have made a start. So there were many artists which were kind of this environmental question also involved. But what I think is so interesting about this manifesto, that he really talks about public art, that it's really so important for him, that it's not about him like creating a new art form. I mean, he's also doing that, this auto-destructive art, but he's aware of Tanguy, he's aware of others. I mean, he never mentions, Nikki is also, you know, shooting at paintings at the time. But of course, Tanguy is a little bit earlier with this machine in the garden in the Museum of Modern Art. So he's really aware of it, but it's, for him, it's not so much an art manifesto, but it's really about making, you know, addressing a public audience about what goes wrong in society, or how, you know, how destruction is a part of our world. So I think that's also why he chooses a manifesto. Of course, there are very many manifestos in art history, you know, like every movement has a manifesto. And here's this artist, you know, like this, you know, like this stateless person in London, and he's writing a manifesto, and not only one, you know, but many. So it's somehow daring, but it's really, you know, he really is an activist. You know, he's really wanting to make a point about that we have to do something about destruction, and that we have to face that we are part of this, you know, the biggest movement, so to say, of the 20th century.
Thank you, Karina. I have a question actually for Ben Ury Gallery, so I'll direct it towards Nicola. The question is just a simple one. Why this exhibition on Metzger now?
Well, we felt that, you know, not much light had been shone on the early years. Most people who come to know Gustav Metzger know his later auto-destructive work, his installation-based and theoretical work, and they don't know so much the early paintings and drawings, which were in fact hidden away from view for 45 years or so, and only actually rediscovered by Metzger in 2010. It had been something I'd been personally thinking about for quite a while. I approached Leanne and the foundation a few years ago, initially just to talk about the drawings, and then you know, the project evolved in various ways, and it became about drawings and paintings, and yeah, a different kind of concept. But you know, the thought was there to showcase the early work from you know, from quite early on, and it's sort of taken a while to come to fruition, you know, for various reasons, including COVID. But yeah, and also I think the exhibition, as I'm sure others at Ben Ury would say, fits well within the Ben Ury Research Unit's new kind of program, showcasing work by immigrant artists to the UK since 1900. So yeah, I hope that sort of answered the question, but yeah, that's why I felt it was important to show this early work. There have been shows that have included examples of early work in numerous other locations, but there hasn't been specifically an exhibition only focusing on the early years. And there are definitely some works that people will never have seen.
So I think with that in mind, we should definitely tell people to come and visit the exhibition, so you can see some of these works that not many people have had the pleasure of seeing. They are very different, really, from what most people expect, I think. With those early works in mind, Karina, what do you think in terms of a connection or or maybe a disconnection between the sort of early drawings and paintings and the works, more of the works that you were just talking about, the sort of the models, the proposals, the works that Gustav basically conceived later?
Yeah, I think, you know, like I'm very happy we were able to acquire this painting on mild steel from 58 we have now in our collection, because it's kind of coming out of the show on British and German art after the war that I did at the Sprengel Museum in 2014, where I always thought of Metzger as a missing link also. You know, we have Baumeister, we have Nye, we have the German painters, and everything after the war is kind of a restart for the Germans. So it's somehow you don't confront what has been, but you try to get a new perspective. And there's Gustav Metzger making like this mild steel painting and really hammering. And it's really nice to have it now in the collection together in a way. And but what I think is that with the cardboards or with the mild steel paintings, he kind of makes a cut and really tries to find a form where he can reach more people and where he can be larger and make larger works really. Because, I mean, which then he didn't realize for long also, we have to say. So it's really interesting what happens between, you know, the late 50s, the manifestos, proposals, and then Documenta not realized. So there's a really long period. He made drawings all the time, but he didn't really realize lots of things. So it's almost like Duchamp, or I don't know. So, but I think there is a cut and then something else starts. And I don't know how he made a living or how he really survived as an artist in those times. And then he becomes this artist because he goes, you know, to every lecture. He's very well informed. He meets all the people. He has a home in London. He has a network. And what I also find fascinating that his network becomes younger and younger. You know, he doesn't stay with his people, but it's always like new people, and some will talk also in the lectures. So I found this project, which I then included in 2014, about oh gosh, no, I forget the name, with the hole and the stone. Help me. Yeah, it comes back to me. Anyways.
Oh, you mean null object?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I found it really interesting because he comes back to early sculptures, also from Moore and Hepworth, you know, like talking about the whole in sculpture. And so that's really interesting, like how he relates also to art history. And so somehow in his really late project, then he comes back to history, but I think he really made a big step at the end of the 50s, and then he never really goes back. He goes back conceptually, but not with material.
Oh. Okay.
I mean, it will be interesting to see the drawings really, and I understand Elizabeth Fisher is working a lot on them, and it will be really great to see them all together at some point.
Yeah, that's partly an ambition really, but it is such a big job because there are so many. So this exhibition obviously will, although it's showing quite a lot that people haven't seen before, it's still just a small fraction of what is actually in the archive. So one day we hope to realize a much bigger project and bring all of those works together, you know, big and small. Sorry, big and small, and honestly, from the form of sketches to the larger works to the medium works. My daughter just got home. There's just so much basically in the archive that people will have never seen. And Lizzie Fisher, you're right, is the one who's now working on a much larger display. So hopefully in the next few years that will be realized.
I mean, one part I didn't talk about because I thought it goes too far, but of course the whole body of the historic photographs and relationship to history and his own history. And I found it really interesting, and I wasn't aware so much. He never, you know, in Münster, he never talked about being Jewish. I mean, it was clear, but it was not, you know, something he would address. Also in all the conversation with me, it was never saying, you know, like, I'm Jewish, I'm from Germany. We didn't talk about it at all. So it was about destruction, it was environment, etc. But of course, he made these works, and Eichmann and the Angel, and And I was very happy to help a colleague from the Tel Aviv Art Museum, where they then showed Eichmann and the Angel. And so that's a whole body of work, which I find also very interesting, the way he relates to his history and the whole history, but that it's really coming late in his work. But of course, like we know the mobile again, and when you see this car and the gas killing the tree in the cube on the roof of the on the top of the car, I mean, you really you have to. I mean, as a German, at least, I mean, you have to think about this early, like the cars, the gas cars that the National Socialists had to gas people. Like little groups, sent in this car where there was written Kaiser's Kaffee, like to make to make it not obvious, but they would just kill the people in there, and that was the beginning of the gas chambers. So you cannot not think about it when you see these pieces by him.
Yes, definitely. Well, I think at the moment, it looks like we're out of questions, and we're nearing 7 o'clock. So I'll just wrap it up there. I just want to say thank you, obviously, for everyone who attended. We had a great turnout and lots of interesting questions. And of course, thank you so much to Karina Plath. We really appreciated you giving that talk. It was, super interesting. And, there's so many things that could be expanded on, but I think that was a really, really great overview of some of those very interesting projects that Gustav did. I'd actually personally love to see another exhibition of unrealized projects and models, an updated version maybe. But yes, thanks again so much as well, obviously, to Nicola, who's co-curated this exhibition, and to the Ben Urry Gallery. I just want to have one second here to say one reminder, which is that the show itself opens on the 16th of June. So you can book a slot to actually come see it if you're in London, if you can be in London. And basically it's open, I think, every day. The other thing to mention is on the 15th of June, the night before, there's going to be at this exact same time, 6 to 7 p.m. UK time, a virtual private view. We'll try our best to give everyone an overview, no matter where in the world you might be. So yes, please sign up on the website for that as well. Thanks again, everyone. Thanks, Karina.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thank you very much.
Bye.